building in Illinois is Willow Creek Community Church. For decades, it was the most influential church in America. Not just a church, a blueprint. Pastors flew in from every state to study how it operated. It had a food court, a bookstore, an auditorium that seated 7,000 people. It hosted leadership conferences that drew 75,000 people every year. That's more than most NFL stadiums hold. Now it's empty, and it's not alone. Across America, massive church buildings are being sold off, abandoned, or converted into Amazon warehouses. Buildings where tens of thousands once gathered to worship, now shipping your next 2-day delivery. But this isn't just about one church, or 2, or 10. In 2023, megachurch attendance dropped 18% nationwide. Donations fell 23%. And 47% of megachurches reported they were considering selling their property. Nearly half. Churches that had 15,000 members 5 years ago now have fewer than 1,000. Buildings designed for thousands now echo with hundreds. The math is brutal, and the collapse is accelerating. Here's what makes this story different from every other "churches are declining" headline you've seen. This isn't a slow fade. This is a controlled demolition happening in real time. Empires that took 30, 40, 50 years to build are disappearing in months. And the people sitting in those half-empty auditoriums right now have no idea what's coming next. But before we get to where this ends, we need to understand how it started. Because the collapse didn't begin in 2023. The cracks started forming decades ago. And nobody wanted to see them. Harvest Bible Chapel in Chicago declared bankruptcy in 2023. The church owed $70 million. 5 years earlier, it had 13,000 members. By the time it filed for bankruptcy, fewer than 1,000 remained. That's not a decline. That's an extinction event. Crystal Cathedral in California. The glass monument that invented televised church services. Sold to the Catholic Church after bankruptcy. Mars Hill in Seattle had 15 locations across 5 states. At its peak, 15,000 people attended every Sunday. By 2014, all 15 locations were closed. Within months. These aren't small churches struggling to pay rent. These are empires collapsing. Gateway Church in Texas went from 35,000 attendees to 25,000 in 2 years. They closed multiple campuses. Saddleback Church saw giving drop $30 million between 2020 and 2022. Now here's the part that should terrify anyone still sitting in a megachurch auditorium. The buildings are too big, the debt is too large, and the people aren't coming back. In 1990, America had roughly 300 megachurches. By 2000, that number hit 600. By 2020, nearly 1,750. The growth looked unstoppable. Pastors became celebrities. Buildings became entertainment complexes. And the money flowed like never before. But here's what nobody calculated. Every single one of those buildings was built on the assumption that growth would never stop. More people meant more donations. More donations meant bigger buildings. Bigger buildings attracted even more people, until it wasn't. Between 2000 and 2010, American megachurches took on an estimated $7 billion in collective debt. Borrowed money for buildings, sound systems, parking lots, coffee bars. And when the cycle broke, the debt didn't disappear. A church in suburban Atlanta has a 4,000-seat sanctuary. They average 1,200 people on Sundays. They owe $50 million. Their monthly mortgage payment is $280,000. Monthly giving, $350,000. After the mortgage, they have $70,000 left for everything else. Staff, utilities, programs, missions. Their electric bill alone is $35,000 a month, for a building they're using at 30% capacity. They can't afford to stay, but they can't afford to leave either. The building is worth maybe $30 million in today's market. Selling means declaring bankruptcy, and that story is repeating in every major city in America. But this didn't start with COVID. It started the moment the first megachurch decided growth was the mission. The model was simple: build a massive campus, create an experience people can't get at home, and watch attendance explode. Lakewood Church in Houston bought an NBA arena for $15 million, then spent another $75 million renovating it. Churches borrowed $50 million, $80 million, sometimes over $100 million, to construct sprawling facilities. And banks loved it. Churches don't pay property tax. They have consistent revenue streams. And they almost never default. Almost. Between 2000 and 2010, lenders handed out church construction loans like candy. A church with 2,000 members could borrow $20 million, build a campus for $5,000, fill the new building within 2 years, then borrow another $30 million to build satellite campuses. Growth funded growth. Debt funded expansion. And expansion attracted more people. Real estate developers competed for church contracts, and attendance numbers kept climbing. By 2005, the average megachurch had annual revenue exceeding $6 million. The largest ones? Over $50 million a year. Willow Creek's annual budget peaked at $73 million. For one church. That kind of money doesn't just fund ministry. It funds an empire. Book deals, conference circuits, music labels, merchandise. Pastors weren't just preachers anymore. They were brands. And the buildings became monuments to those brands. Walk into a megachurch in 2008, and you'd see coffee shops that rivaled Starbucks. Bookstores selling pastor-authored bestsellers. Childcare facilities bigger than most daycare centers. Auditoriums with lighting rigs worth more than the average house. It wasn't church. It was an experience. And for a while it worked. People came. They gave. They invited their friends. The model scaled. Until the model became the problem. Because here's what nobody asked during the boom years. What happens when the charismatic leader at the center of it all turns out to be something else entirely? That's where the cracks really started. And once they formed, they spread faster than anyone could stop. Megachurches weren't built on theology. They were built on personality. Remove the charismatic founder, and the whole thing often collapsed. Mark Driscoll built Mars Hill Church from a living room Bible study to 15,000 members across 15 locations. He was controversial, aggressive, and magnetic. Then investigations revealed he used church funds to manipulate book sales. He paid $210,000 in church money to game the New York Times bestseller list. Accusations of plagiarism surfaced. Former staff described environments of spiritual abuse and bullying. When the board forced him out in 2014, the church didn't just shrink, it evaporated. Within 4 months, every campus was shuttered. The organization that took 18 years to build disappeared in 120 days. James McDonald at Harvest Bible Chapel followed a similar pattern. He built a multi-campus empire with a national radio show and publishing deals. Then, recordings leaked of him using vulgar language about other pastors. He joked about planting child pornography on a critic's computer. Financial audits revealed irregularities. He was fired in 2019. Attendance at Harvest dropped from 13,000 to 800 within a year. But here's the part that matters most. The problem wasn't just bad leaders. It was the structure itself. These churches had no denominational oversight. Boards were often filled with the pastor's friends. Financial records were hidden from congregations. The IRS has never audited a church for tax purposes. Since 1954, churches have operated with near-total financial opacity. One charismatic leader with unchecked power could build an empire. But when that leader fell, there was nothing left to hold it together. No structure, no oversight, no backup plan. And the model itself encouraged this. Megachurches competed for talent by offering celebrity pastors total control. Want to preach without a board reviewing your content? Done. Want to set your own salary? No problem. Want to hire family members into leadership positions? Common practice. The biggest churches gave their lead pastors corporate-level authority with non-profit-level accountability, which is to say, almost none. Perry Noble was fired from New Spring Church in South Carolina in 2016 for alcoholism. The church had 30,000 members and a $30 million annual budget. His salary was never disclosed to the congregation. Still hasn't been. The human cost of this model doesn't show up in the bankruptcy filings. But it's there. Former megachurch staff report extraordinarily high rates of burnout, PTSD, and depression. Therapists specializing in religious trauma say they've seen a 300% increase in clients since 2018. Many of those clients aren't just leaving megachurches. They're leaving Christianity entirely. The personality-driven model didn't just fail institutionally. It failed spiritually. But the leadership problem was only one crack in the foundation. The money problem was bigger. Here's what most megachurch attendees never knew. The majority of their donations didn't fund ministry. It funded mortgages. A typical megachurch spent 50 to 60% of its budget on facilities. Another 20 to 30% went to staff salaries. That left maybe 15% for actual programs, missions, and community help. But the pitch to donors was always about changing lives. When people realized 70% of their money was paying for buildings and staff, something shifted. COVID accelerated this realization. Churches set up online giving during lockdowns. People could donate from home. And they could also research from home. They looked up pastor salaries, property values, building costs. They did the math. Joel Osteen lives in a $10.5 million mansion. Creflo Dollar once asked his congregation for $65 million to buy a private jet. Stephen Furtick built a 16,000-square-foot house while preaching about generosity. The pastors quoted prosperity gospel. But younger members read the same Bible passages about Jesus, saying it's easier for a camel to pass through a needle's eye than for a rich person to enter heaven. The math didn't add up, and the donations started to dry up. But here's the part that rarely gets mentioned. American churches pay zero property tax. Willow Creek's campus sits on land worth an estimated $100 million. It pays nothing to the local municipality. Lakewood Church operates out of a former NBA arena in downtown Houston. Zero property tax. The total annual tax exemption benefit to religious organizations nationwide is estimated at $71 billion. And many megachurch pastors receive their compensation through multiple streams simultaneously. Salary, housing allowance, book royalties, speaking fees. The housing allowance alone is tax-free. A pastor making $200,000 a year can receive another $100,000 as a housing allowance and pays zero federal income tax on it. And none of this was illegal. That's the problem. The system was designed to protect churches from government interference. But it also protected churches from accountability. When a congregation started asking questions about where the money went, leadership could simply refuse to answer. And many did. Financial transparency became a deal-breaker for younger donors. Millennials and Gen Z didn't just want to give. They wanted to know. Where does it go? Who decides? Can I see the budget? The megachurch model actively avoided those questions. And the generation that sustained megachurches, baby boomers and older Gen X, is aging out. They were comfortable with big institutions and top-down leadership. The younger generations aren't replacing them. Because they're not just skeptical of megachurches. They're skeptical of institutions entirely. In 2007, 15% of Americans claimed no religious affiliation. By 2021, that number reached 29%. Among people under 30, it's over 40%. But here's the key detail. Most of these people still believe in God. They're not becoming atheists. They're leaving organized religion. And they're leaving megachurches fastest of all. Millennials and Gen Z don't want spectacle. They want authenticity. They don't want to be anonymous in a crowd of 5,000. They want community. They're skeptical of institutions, allergic to hypocrisy, and they research everything online. A megachurch, trying to attract 25-year-olds with a hipper worship band or better coffee, completely misses the point. Young people don't want better production value. They want transparency. Where does the money go? Who makes decisions? Can I ask hard questions without being labeled divisive? The megachurch model, come on Sunday, enjoy the show, drop your money in the bucket, go home, doesn't answer those questions. It actively avoids them. And something unexpected started happening. While megachurches hemorrhaged young members, Gen Z started flocking to the exact opposite. Ancient liturgical traditions. Catholic, Orthodox, and Anglican churches are seeing unexpected growth among people under 30. They want mystery, history, tradition. Something that feels connected to 2,000 years of faith, not a startup launched in 1995. They want incense and silence, not smoke machines and stadium rock. The megachurch offered an experience. But experiences are consumable. Younger people wanted something they could participate in. Something that didn't depend on one pastor's charisma or one building's amenities. And here's what makes this shift so devastating for megachurches. It's not reversible. A 60-year-old couple whose faith was shaped in the 1980s might tolerate declining quality or leadership scandals. They have decades of investment, friendships, muscle memory. A 25-year-old has none of that. If the church fails them once, they leave, and they don't come back. Studies show that people who leave a church in their 20s rarely return to that same church. They might find faith elsewhere. But the institution that lost them, gone forever. Megachurches built their entire model on attracting and retaining families. Young families with kids are the financial engine of any church. They give consistently. They volunteer. They invite others. But those families aren't walking through the doors anymore. And the ones still sitting in the pews are aging faster than the church can replace them. The average age of a megachurch attendee in 2000 was 38. In 2023, it's 52. 14 years older in just 2 decades. That's not a trend. That's a countdown. But the demographic shift alone wouldn't have collapsed the system this fast. What accelerated everything was a series of scandals so damaging they didn't just hurt individual churches. They shattered trust in the entire model. Bill Hybels, founder of Willow Creek, resigns after multiple women accuse him of sexual misconduct spanning decades. The church that taught other churches how to grow is revealed to have protected its founder instead of victims. Carl Lentz, the celebrity pastor of Hillsong, New York, who baptized Justin Bieber, is fired for multiple affairs. Hillsong closes multiple U.S. campuses within 2 years. Ravi Zacharias, one of Christianity's most respected thinkers, dies. An investigation reveals he sexually abused multiple women. The Southern Baptist Convention releases a report showing hundreds of pastors and church workers were credibly accused of abuse over 2 decades. Leadership actively suppressed the information. Each scandal didn't just damage one church. It damaged the entire model. Young people watched these massive institutions protect abusers, prioritize reputation, and silence victims. The trust didn't just crack. It shattered. But here's what made the scandal cascade uniquely destructive. These weren't small-town pastors nobody had heard of. These were the faces of the megachurch movement. Bill Hybels literally wrote the books other pastors used to build their churches. Ravi Zacharias debated atheists at Oxford. Carl Lentz was on magazine covers. When they fell, it wasn't just their churches that suffered. It was every church that had modeled itself after them. And the legal fallout is still unfolding. Legal settlements from abuse cases have cost American churches an estimated $4 billion since 2000. Insurance companies took notice. Church liability insurance premiums skyrocketed 400 to 600% in some markets. Several major insurers stopped writing policies for churches with over 2,000 members entirely. Too much risk. Some megachurches started self-insuring through shell organizations. Which means if a major lawsuit hits, the entire church assets are on the line. One settlement could bankrupt a church that survived COVID. And the cases keep coming. In 2023 alone, over 200 new abuse allegations were filed against churches nationwide. The scandal cascade isn't over. It's accelerating. But even without the scandals, even without the leadership failures, megachurches faced another crisis. One that nobody saw coming. March 2020. COVID-19. Churches closed their doors thinking people would rush back the moment they reopened. They didn't. And what happened during those lockdowns exposed something megachurches had been hiding for years. The experience wasn't actually necessary. Strip away the lights, the production value, the coffee bar, the energy of thousands of people. Put a pastor in his living room talking to a camera. And suddenly, you're just another video competing with Netflix. Some people found smaller churches. Some started hiking on Sundays. Some realized they didn't miss it at all. And when the doors finally reopened, only 60 to 70% of previous attendees returned. The ones who stayed home? Disproportionately young families. The future of any congregation. COVID didn't create the megachurch collapse. But it revealed how fragile the foundation really was. March 2020 should have been a temporary setback. That's not what happened. Churches moved online overnight. Pastors preached to empty rooms, staring into cameras instead of crowds. And something strange happened. People started paying attention to things they never noticed before. Tithing apps like Tithely and PushPay had already been rolling out for years. But COVID forced mass adoption. Suddenly, every donor had a digital dashboard, real-time giving history, itemized records, full transparency into their own contributions. PushPay alone processes $7 billion annually in church donations. The same technology that made giving easier also made financial opacity harder to maintain. Donors started asking questions they never thought to ask before. If I can see exactly what I gave, why can't I see exactly where it went? Some churches actually abandoned giving apps specifically to reduce donor visibility. They walked away from convenient technology because it was too transparent. Meanwhile, something else was happening in living rooms across America. People weren't just watching their own church online. They were shopping around. A person in rural Ohio could watch T.D. Jakes on Sunday morning. Then Stephen Furtick's Elevation Church in the afternoon. Then Andy Stanley's sermon that evening. All for free, all from their couch. Megachurches had spent years perfecting online production value to compete with television and streaming platforms. They got exactly what they optimized for. People who no longer needed to show up in person. Elevation Church's online campus has millions of YouTube subscribers. But their physical attendance plateaued. They built a machine so good at digital delivery that it started replacing the very thing it was meant to support. When churches reopened in late 2020 and 2021, the numbers came back brutal. Only 60 to 70% of previous attendees returned. Saddleback Church saw giving drop $30 million between 2020 and 2022. Gateway Church in Texas went from 35,000 attendees to 25,000. They closed multiple campuses just to survive. The debt that seemed manageable with full buildings became crushing with half-empty auditoriums. Remember that church in suburban Atlanta? 4,000 seats. 1,200 people showing up. $50 million in debt. That math didn't exist before COVID. The pandemic didn't create the debt. It didn't create the scandals. It didn't create the demographic shift. But it accelerated every single one of those problems simultaneously. It was the final pressure test. And most megachurches failed it. Commercial real estate agents who specialize in church properties used to handle 1 or 2 megachurch sales per year. In 2023, one agent in Texas had 17. The market is now flooded with massive buildings nobody knows what to do with. Too specialized for easy conversion. Too expensive to maintain for any organization not drawing thousands weekly. And the buildings themselves? They're becoming something nobody expected. Willow Creek's campus is being considered for redevelopment as mixed-use commercial space. Mars Hill's abandoned buildings still have faded signage. Nobody's bothered to take it down. The monuments to the megachurch era are becoming monuments to its collapse. But here's what most people don't realize. These buildings can't just become something else. Megachurch architecture was designed with single-purpose specificity. Stadium seating, baptismal pools, broadcast infrastructure, massive parking lots. Converting one of these buildings into apartments or retail space can cost $20 to $40 million in renovation. Sometimes more than the original construction cost. Some buildings are being demolished entirely, because conversion costs exceed demolition and rebuild costs combined. And private equity firms have noticed the opportunity. Amazon, Home Depot, and self-storage companies now have dedicated acquisition teams specifically targeting distressed church properties. Some megachurch campuses are being converted into charter schools, medical centers, entertainment venues. One former megachurch property in Oklahoma was purchased by a marijuana dispensary group. A building where thousands once gathered to worship is now selling cannabis. This fire sale dynamic means churches are selling generational assets at 30 to 50 cents on the dollar. Buildings worth $50 million on paper selling for $20 million because there's no other buyer. Insurance companies are raising premiums on megachurch properties by 200 to 300%. For struggling churches, that's another body blow. Banks are getting nervous too. Church-related real estate debt in default or near default could exceed $2 billion by 2025. And it's not just the big names collapsing anymore. It's churches you've never heard of. Mid-size congregations with 3,000 or 4,000 members are facing the exact same math. Too much debt, too much building, too few people. The commercial real estate market is flooded with these properties right now. And there's no clear buyer for most of them. They're too big for small congregations. Too specialized for most businesses, Too expensive to maintain for anyone not drawing thousands of people every single week. So they sit, empty, decaying, waiting. But while these buildings sit empty, something else is happening. Somewhere far away from stadium seating and food courts. Something smaller. Something nobody expected to survive this collapse. Something that might actually be the future. While megachurches collapse, something unexpected is happening. Churches with 200 to 800 members are seeing modest growth. House churches are multiplying. Small groups meeting in living rooms. No stage, no lighting rig, no coffee bar. Just people. And young people are flocking to the exact opposite of megachurches. Ancient liturgical traditions. Catholic, Orthodox, Anglican. Gen Z is driving a revival of practices that are thousands of years old. They want mystery, not marketing. Some megachurches are adapting by intentionally getting smaller. They're selling massive campuses and meeting in multiple smaller locations instead. North Point Ministries in Atlanta pioneered this shift. Instead of one giant campus, multiple mid-sized communities spread across the metro area. Others are finally being honest about what failed. In 2007, Willow Creek released a study surveying their own members about spiritual growth. The findings shocked them. There was almost no correlation between church participation and spiritual maturity. People who attended regularly, volunteered, and gave money weren't necessarily growing spiritually. Many of the most mature believers felt the church was too shallow. Bill Hybels admitted it publicly. "We made a mistake," he said. "We should have taught people to take responsibility for their own faith." The megachurch model, show up, enjoy the experience, go home, failed at its core mission. It took 16 years for the structural collapse to follow that spiritual bankruptcy. The buildings are still there. Massive monuments to an era that's ending. Some will become community centers. Some will be torn down. Some will sit empty for years. Too expensive to maintain. Too specialized to sell. But in living rooms, coffee shops, and smaller sanctuaries, something else is growing. It doesn't have stadium seating. It won't make headlines. The American megachurch bubble took 50 years to inflate. It's bursting in less than 5. What's emerging might not look like church at all. At least not the version America built. The age of spectacle is over. What comes next depends on whether people choose depth over size. Authenticity over impression. The bubble has burst. Now we find out what was real underneath. And half of these buildings still standing right now? They won't be standing by 2026. The only question left is which ones.